I now invite Dr. Dhananjay Shukla, who is the Director of Vitreoretina Services at Ratan Jyoti Netralaya, Gwalior. With his vast experience, he would be speaking to us on atypical presentations of diabetic retinopathy. Over to you, Dhananjay.
Very good evening to all, and Vande Mataram to all my Indian colleagues. I would start straight away. So I would start these words of Richard Feynman. Am I audible to everybody?
Yeah, just the volume needs to be a little higher.
And if you could do the slideshow, please.
Yeah, put it on the slideshow, please.
Yeah, so why I start with these words of Richard Feynman, because what we call atypical today might become typical in a few years' time. So there is a worldwide increase in diabetes, and even in India, there are close to 80 million diabetics who also live longer since the discovery of insulin, just like ROP children. Like we have experienced from COVID-19, the unusual cases keep on coming as we see more and more of the same disease. So if recognition is the first step in treatment, let's dig in. I and Anand did this study, this actually review long time back in current opinion. And we are in the position of the 6 blind men who feel the elephant in a different way and tell different things about the same thing. So what makes diabetic retinopathy atypical? It's maybe inherent variability of the disease itself, which we don't know about, or there may be coexisting systemic diseases, as Dr. Amod was just spilling to us, the ocular disease affecting diabetic retinopathy and some other stuff. Let's look at the inherent variability. The most important thing is diabetic disc edema. The other is featureless retina, peripheral lesions in diabetic retinopathy, which are supposed to be a posterior pole disease, an unusual course of diabetic retinopathy, and the tractional component in diabetic papillopathy. So what is diabetic papillopathy? It is basically a transient bilateral disc edema in a young diabetic patient with good vision and a minimal diabetic retinopathy. And typically he's a type 1 diabetic. This is supposed to be an extension of retinopathy onto the optic nerve head, and it generally resolves on its own without any sequelae. So why should we know about it? We should know about it because it has to be differentiated from more dangerous conditions like raised intracranial hypertension with papilledema, from malignant hypertension, new vessels on the disc, and also optic nerve drusen. So it was a clear-cut condition till people start describing it in old patients as well as unilaterally. Now we should know that whether a patient is diabetic or not, the commonest cause of unilateral disc edema in a middle-aged patient is non-arthritic ischemic optic neuropathy, which typically causes visual loss, field defects, RAPD, classic angiographic defects, and also on follow-up there's a disc pallor. But still there is so much overlap in the spectrum of these two diseases when unilateral in an old patient that Dr. Here exclaimed in exasperation, there is nothing like diabetic papillopathy. Well, I have to disagree with the great man, because we have some classic cases where you can see a diabetic papillopathy, which is very distinct from AION, resolving asymptomatically and without any sequelae with classic telangiectated vessels. So there is an entity like that. Another entity which intrigues me a lot is featureless retina. Now, I've been reading about this for the last 30 years on all the editions of Ryan. It has never merited more than a single paragraph. So what does it look like? It is basically a PDR masquerading as a mild NPDR. So why? Because the preceding severe NPDR changes somehow get disappeared or glossed over. So what do you see? You see an atrophic retina with white thread-like arterioles, and you should look for these cases when you have PDR in one eye and a falsely mild NPDR kind of appearance in the fellow eye. If you do angiography in these eyes, in the most of the cases, you can see an extensive capillary closure and also presence of new vessels. For example, we had this case with the fellow eye classic PDR. It looks like a mild NPDR. You can see some sheathing of the vessels here on the nasal side and superiorly. And when we did angiography, we found that there was a high-risk PDR with massive NVD. So whenever we see a sheath vessel, we jump to the diagnosis of vasculitis. And we do not pause to think whether the sheath vessel is an artery or a vein, because if it is an arteriole, then you are more likely to be dealing with a case of featureless retina or diabetic retinopathy rather than a retinal vasculitis. For example, in this case, on angiography, you can see There's neither leakage nor sheathing or staining of the vessel. On the other hand, there's occlusion of that artery. Everything which is asymmetric may not be featureless retina. For example, this eye is also a fellow eye of a patient with classic PDR with vitreous hemorrhage. When we did angiography, we didn't find any new vessels. But when we looked slightly in the periphery, we found peripheral new vessels as well as capillary dropout areas. And mind you, this is a normal 50-degree fundus photography and angiography. So peripheral diabetic retinopathy, which occurs by definition outside the 7 standard ETDRS fields, has been described ages back by the Japanese authors in about 2 to 3% of cases. When we got our hands on, especially Adnan Tufail here and Dr. Rajiv Raman, they published recently in Griffith's archives that it is seen in about 30% of cases, more than 30% of cases of diabetic retinopathy. And Silva and al. Have shown that it increases the risk of worsening 3 to 5 times. So peripheral examination is required and mandatory in assessing diabetic retinopathy progression. And is there some specific field? Yes. Rajiv Raman and colleagues have told us that you should look harder in the temporal periphery, especially the supratemporal quadrant. So does it look like the gold standard ETDRS grading is not good enough? Some people think so, and we may have a new classification on a wide, ultra-wide field imaging. So there's another 6 blindment movement for me. Diabetic retinopathy is no longer a posterior fundus disease. Now we look at the unusual course of diabetic retinopathy. We have all experienced in some cases that diabetic retinopathy has a florid course. It rushes very faster, and in spite of treatment, the patients have poor outcome. On the other hand, some cases regress on their own, and it is extremely rare to the extent that just 3 diabetic women constituted an original article in AJO 1996, where Dr. Don Gass was also a co-author. And they showed for the first time that there's not only a spontaneous capillary barrier healing, but also reperfusion of CNP areas and actually reversal of the grades of diabetic retinopathy. This was then. What is now? Now is the common knowledge after RISE and RIGHT studies and VIVID and VISTA studies that reversal of diabetic retinopathy says does occur along with resolution of macular edema with anti-VEGF treatment. Another 6 blindment movement for me. So then there are curio pieces, and I'm most interested in tractional diabetic papillopathy. I saw a case where vitreoretinal traction probably contributed to the visual loss more than the macular tractional edema. So we had this patient who had a vision of 6/9 in the right eye and looked like a high-risk PDR. On angiography, we found there were no NVDs, only telangiectasia. We did an OCT and found a macular edema, but it was more prominent on the nasal side, and there was some traction on the disc. So I was confused and I did not let this patient have any injection. On the follow-up after a month, the patient lost vision and I was aghast. The vision was 636. But lo and behold, the macula was actually flattened and it was the disc which was showing increased traction. So I explained to the patient that this might be a case of tractional diabetic papillopathy. We operated, it was simple surgery, just inducing a PVD, and the patient improved perfectly to 6/6. Then you can have the cases of systemic diseases which mostly aggravate diabetic retinopathy. Now, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and carotid ocular disease are the most common of them. Hypertension is so common that Tony Adames commented that we should not ask whether the diabetic patient is hypertensive. We should ask if he's not hypertensive. I have seen personally a lot of undiagnosed hypertensive patients. For example, this young man who had malignant hypertension but was not aware of it. And simply by treating his hypertension, we could bring down the macular detachment without any injections and also the visual acuity. Then there is a case of lipemic retinopathy, which occurs in about 2% of diabetics with a bilateral coach-like response. Dr. Gupta has elegantly elaborated about it, that statins help so beautifully in these cases, even when the systemic lipids are normal. What about ocular conditions? Some of them which are ocular degenerations like high myopia, glaucoma, optic atrophy, retinitis pigmentosa, or any condition which causes extensive choroidal scarring, for example, multifocal choroiditis or geographic GSPC. All of them cause a metabolic slowdown and therefore slow down the progression of diabetic retinopathy. And they cause much confusion when they are unilateral. A similar thing can happen when a patient has PVD because it removes the scaffold for new vessel growth. This is an uncontrolled diabetic who got a tractional detachment in one eye, but was just saved by the dumb luck of having high myopia in the other eye which prevented the progression of diabetic retinopathy. There are other diseases which alter the picture of diabetic retinopathy. I am reminded of J always, macular telangiectasia and radiation retinopathy. Now, this is a case which amuses me because as a patient, diabetes is very common in patients with MACTEL2. Now, if you look at the angiography, the most prominent leakage is actually not diabetic leakage. It is the wispy leakage characteristic of MACTEL2 and should never be treated. If you do the angiography, OCT, it confirms that there is a case of foveal atrophy and not leakage. In fact, laser will actually harm the patient. So when you have asymmetric diabetic retinopathy, what one should look for? First of all, when do we call it asymmetric? We call it asymmetric when one eye has severe NPDR or PDR and the other eye is very mild changes and they are stable for about 2 years. Second thing, you should remember that diabetic retinopathy per se is extremely rarely asymmetric. More commonly, we may have a case of peripheral diabetic retinopathy, which have been shown to be in about a third of cases, a case of featureless retina, and a unilateral ocular pathology or ipsilateral carotid insufficiency. So the knowledge of unusual has led us to the first evidence of neurodegeneration in the diabetic vascular disease. Now we know that it is also neurodegeneration because of the first shown asymmetry in retinitis pigmentosa. It has improved our diagnostic sensitivity, for example, in featureless retina and peripheral diabetic retinopathy by modifying medical treatment as in lipid diabetic retinopathy or surgical treatment as in tractional diabetic retinopathy, avoiding unnecessary investigation of treatment, for example, in diabetic papillopathy and MACTEL, or aggressive treatment as in florid DR. Most importantly, it was the first observation of asymmetric diabetic retinopathy by Beetham and Aiello because of unilateral choroidal scarring, which actually led to the gold standard treatment of panretinal photocoagulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shukla. That was again a beautiful exposition of the variety and the spectrum that diabetic retinopathy can put us through. So may I invite comments from Dr. Amod Gupta first, and then Dr. Mahesh Shanmugam.
I have it's a very nice presentation, Ranjay. I have just a small point because very recently, a lot of people are talking about looking at the data from, various trials on anti-VEGF therapies and looking at the diabetic retinopathy severity scores or severity scale. They're showing 2-step reduction and all that. Now, please bear in mind that this reduction in severity score is in terms of only the secondary effects, say macular edema, and the stuff like that. There is no reversal of the diabetic retinopathy pathology. The primary pathology stays. The primary pathology here is the ischemia, the capillary non-perfusion areas. Nobody in the world till date, to my mind, has shown that any amount of anti-VEGF therapy reverses the retinal ischemia or reduces the capillary non-perfusion. The day we have achieved that, we would have achieved, a treatment for diabetic retinopathy. Till that point of time, we are just reversing some of the secondary effects like vascular incompetency, leakage, hard exudates, cotton wool spots and stuff like that. We are not targeting the primary pathology. So we have to keep in mind, these are not long-term solutions. The second point of the optic disc pallor, when you brought in the subject of non-arthritic ischemic optic neuropathy, I would also suggest when you're evaluating a patient with optic disc pallor, please do a confrontation visual field. Last year I had shown a patient whom I had the privilege of following for more than 35 years, of a patient with non-granulomatous uveitis. And in the process, he had become diabetic. Somebody was looking at him and saying, you have developed optic atrophy because of diabetes. All along, the guy was harboring a craniopharyngioma. And by the time the patient become blind, they kept on harping the theme of optic disc pallor due to diabetes. So we should not be focused on the local pathologies all the time. Just show him the fingers. If the guy had shown him the finger and temporal field or look for the altitudinal field effects, things would have been clearer. So I think we should not lose sense of, we shouldn't be carried away by, like Anita said, we have to have a holistic approach we are primarily physicians first, then ophthalmologists. Let's not be confined only to the optic nerve head or to the retina in our lives. We need to look at the patient as a whole. We need to do that. Thank you.
So quick comment from Dr. Mahesh Shanmugam, sir, on the whole debate about diabetic disc edemas, AION versus diabetic papillopathy. What is your take on that?
Like that was a nice presentation by Dr. Dhananjay. I agree with Dr. Dhananjay. Like, it's not that like diabetic papillopathy doesn't exist, but then you need to rule out the traction part of it. And it's usually the PDR with the NVD which presents subsequently as the traction part of it. So if you see the NVD with a little bit of fibrous tissue which is pulling up the disc, then I would consider vitrectomy. But then BEP studies have also been done in these patients to show that there is a progression, in which case we can do a vitrectomy. So that's one. Like, if I can make a couple of more comments, I would agree with Dr. Professor Amod about the not able to reverse the diabetic retinopathy, because like I used to believe that we are able to reverse the diabetic retinopathy, but the recent studies have shown that despite the anti-VEGF causing regression of PDR, the visual field effects seem to be increased. It's as good as the chronic PRP. So that's the latest study which has shown. So we don't seem to be having an effect of reversing the diabetic retinopathy, and there is still so much more to learn about diabetic retinopathy, despite the fact that we are treating the anti-VEGF agents. And one other comment about the silent retinopathy, one of the reasons why we think it's silent is these patients don't seem to have much of macular edema. So it's not that like hemorrhages and hard exudates are not there. So we tend to think that these patients do not have diabetic retinopathy, wherein they seem to have proliferative retinopathy in the periphery.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I make a comment?
Yeah, please, Anita.
A quick one.
Yeah,
I think 4 things that I want to kind of say is that
Please.
if you see diabetic retinopathy that's not kind of responding, things about look at their feet. They may have pedal edema and fluid retention. So you want to look at their feet and you want to kind of take their shoes off. Second is sleep apnea, especially patients who are kind of obese and diabetic. You have to think about sleep apnea and see if that's playing a role. Third is medications, glitazones. You know, sometimes they are on glitazones. So you do everything, you do anti-VEGF, you do focal laser, it's not going away. Take a look at their meds, and if they're on glitazone, try to see if you can take them off of glitazone. So, and renal failure, you know, patients, somehow they'll tell, oh, my doctor did my labs and everything's okay, but they may have renal insufficiency that's sort of been not really paid attention to. So those are 4 things that I always look for in patients that don't respond as I would expect them to respond.
Anita is still smelling patients' breaths.
It's good that we're doing this remotely. So thank you.